From the University of Otago Department of Health, Dr Amanda Kvalsvig joins us. Good evening, Dr Kvalsvig. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, it's great to talk.
I saw an article that you wrote, which we'll bring up for people who are watching so they can see it, and it spoke to me because since New Zealand went into orange in the Omicron COVID warning system, we've been talking here on this show about, from my perspective, the lack of direction from the government, especially when it comes to schools. I've got a child at intermediate school, and I've got a child at secondary school, and I've got a child at tertiary education at the moment. And when I saw your article titled that we need a COVID action plan for schools, I was like, yes, preach from the rooftops. This is what we need to be talking about. So maybe we could just set up the conversation by saying from the start, you say we urgently need a COVID action plan for schools. Why?
Well, I think it's quite clear that what's happening now isn't working. So that would be the first answer to why we need one now. We really needed one much earlier in the year, but it's never too late to start. What we can see at the moment, and particularly during term one, was high numbers of cases in children, high numbers of cases in teachers. That's had an impact on learning and teaching and the operation of schools. It's had very far-reaching impacts, in fact, because it's not only what happens in school, but you've had children getting sick and bringing COVID home to family members. Some of those family members might have underlying conditions that they're concerned about. And you have older family members who might be more at risk of serious disease and younger family members who can't be vaccinated. So it's like dropping a stone into a pool. You get those ripples that go right through society. Children are often seen as a kind of a separate population from the rest of us, and of course we know they're not. They live in our homes and they interact with adults. They never live alone. They always live with other people, and they are not separate from society. They are a very important part of it.
Yeah, most people, well, I don't know if it's most people, I'll say a good percentage of the people who I know who have gotten COVID has been because it's been brought home from their school. So there is quite a significant number of, just anecdotally, people I know where I've seen that. So I think, well, if I'm seeing it amongst the people, my circle of friends, then surely that must be representative of what's happening out in the community as well. So yeah, I've seen it and I agree with you wholeheartedly. When we moved into orange and the schools had the option to enforce masks or not, some schools, especially here in Dunedin, kept that mask mandate in place and other ones didn't. They made masks optional. Now, I'll never say which schools that my kids go to or because I don't want to identify the principals. I don't want to criticize them personally because I think they're in a bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because the principals are saying we're going to follow the ministry advice. But the ministry, from speaking to people like Michael Baker and Anna Brooks and other people we've had on the show, don't seem to be following the epidemiologists' advice. So you've got the principals who are either going to have to be fighting with the parents who don't want their kids wearing masks because they think, oh, this is a big waste of time, or they're going to be able to kind of kick the can down the road and say, well, this is what the ministry is saying, so we're following government advice. The problem with that is what the principals in these schools are doing is they're making the 12 and 15-year-olds the experts. So the principals are saying, I'm not the expert, I'm following advice. But what they're actually doing is they're making the 12-year-old be the expert because it's the 12-year-old who then decides, shall I wear a mask or not? So I see it as a huge failing in leadership amongst some of these schools. Nothing personal towards if any of those principals of my kids see this personally, but I'm desperate for good advice to go out there and for schools to be listening to the people in the labs rather than the people in the beehive, especially if the people in the labs are saying things very differently to the people on the 9th floor of the beehive. What do you think about that?
I agree with all of that. I support all of the things you're saying, and what you're describing is a very complicated system of government, schools, individual families and children, who all have some degree of autonomy, who are all being asked to do risk assessments, and they're not always being given the tools they need to do those risk assessments. And another problem that I think you've mentioned, but not explicitly, is that there are some big power differentials here. Schools are expected to implement advice from the Ministry of Education. Students are expected to do what schools ask them to do. And sometimes that means that the power relationship can actually get in the way of a good COVID response. For example, if you have a family where some people in that family are vulnerable, it might be the child, or it might be someone at home, without leadership from the top, that child is expected to go into school and argue with teachers or even the principal or the board to be better protected. And going a step up, teachers are being expected to act as public health officials in a way, in terms of making risk assessments, deciding what protections are needed, and then implementing them and enforcing them. And that puts teachers in a very difficult position, and principals in a difficult position. The other thing that I think that you didn't mention that makes it quite hard is mandates are always sensitive topics, aren't they? It's a mandate sits really on the edge of what we feel comfortable with in public health. We'd rather people did what they need to do voluntarily and freely and spontaneously. And when you put a mandate on, you're actually you're putting some controls on that person, and that's always got to be done very carefully, very thoughtfully, very sensitively. You've got to think about all the pros and cons. So there are some parents now in the school communities who are very, very firmly against mask mandates, and that is a valid position to hold, and they need to be respected for that position. There are some people who either don't agree with wearing masks or agree in principle but feel unable to wear masks, and they should never be compelled to wear a mask. So you've got those opposing tensions, I think. And when there's no leadership from the top, all of that devolves down to the person at the bottom of the chain, trying to stay safe, trying to keep other people safe. And it's disabling, and it doesn't really work as outbreak control. And I think that's the final thing. It just really doesn't work.
Yeah. And you talk about the person at the bottom, and that's why I talk about it's the kids who are now having to make these decisions. Because even if mum and dad or whatever the family makeup it says, I want you to wear your mask at school, it's actually little Johnny or little Jenny who makes that decision if they're in a school where masks are optional, because mum's not or dad's not sitting in the classroom. They don't know. So I think I hear what you're saying about mandates, and I agree with you. I guess as a lay person who just thinks about this, the reason I struggle a bit with the idea about being sort of sensitive about the mandates is we all have mandates in our lives. They're called rules and laws that we're not sensitive about. There's not a kickback for not wearing your seatbelt. There's not a kickback for, smoking in pubs. So there's these other things that even if the individual disagrees, the society doesn't push back against them. That's just the way it is. So I hear what you're saying, and I've never, and I don't think I ever will or want to beat up on people who don't think masks are necessary. But each coin has two sides. The equal and opposite to that is they probably still put their seatbelt on getting in their car. They probably, if they're smokers, still don't smoke in the pub or the restaurant because they're mandated not to. Maybe it's a packaging issue. Maybe people freak out with the word mandate. It sounds a bit Orwellian and Big Brother, whereas if it was just, I don't know what you'd call a temporary law, but the rules for right now, because of this worldwide pandemic that's still going on, it might be better received. I'm not sure.
Yes, I think the how you frame it is very important. And the first thing I would say is I do support mandates because I think we are in a situation where that is warranted. It's important always to listen to and understand the people who don't agree with them, and I do try to listen hard and understand their rationale. But having thought it through on both sides, I've come down on the side of mask mandates are needed in school right now, and but I agree that a mandate sounds intimidating to some people,
Yeah.
and it's got to be done carefully. Something that I found very interesting was talking recently with, or over a recent period, with the Disability Rights Commissioner and the Child Commissioner, excuse me, who and we had a conversation, really a rights-based conversation about these things, and they came down very strongly in favour of mandates from a rights point of view.
Wow.
And I think I really, that is the direction I come from too. It's when people aren't wearing masks, it's disabling because it means that some people can't safely enter that space. It's excluding. Whereas when it's something that everybody is doing, then that's inclusive. That's allowing people to participate, and participation is so important for children in all aspects of their lives. So there's this aspect of personal choice becomes disabling because one person can make a choice not to take any safety precautions for COVID, and that puts somebody else at risk. So I think we can make a good case for it. What I think I would prefer, if we could choose how we wanted things to happen, would be that it would actually be values-based rather than mandated. And values-based is about we have to keep one another safe.
Mm.
And in an ideal world, that's how it would work. And that would be your basis for decision-making. You have to keep people safe, not just me, but people around me. And interestingly, when people have actually studied this abroad, they looked at the kind of messaging that encourages people to wear masks or take other precautionary measures. And the most powerful way to frame it to people was to say that wearing a mask keeps somebody safe. So people are much more likely to wear masks. So they think about this as a way of keeping people safe, and actually specific people, I think, not just kind of generically, I'm doing it to keep people safe, but I'm going to do it to keep these people that I love safe, these people that I care about. I'm going to do it for them. And when you frame it that way, people are very much more likely to see the value of it.
That sounds like a lovely society. I wish we lived in it.
It's not the one we live in, for sure.
No, because I agree with you. In an ideal world, this is, we want to care and look after each other and, ideally think about our neighbor, maybe not always ahead of ourselves, but certainly at least beside ourselves. But it seems that that's not the society we have, and people are interested in their individualistic rights. And I wrote some stuff down where you were talking about rights, because you explained it in a way that I hadn't thought about before, which was a lovely way to think about it, which is if that person who wants their individualistic rights, if that individualistic right is disproportionately impacting, let's say, societal rights, then we should go with societal rights. So if a room full of people want to be safe and wear masks, if one person doesn't, then maybe that person, and for some reason I'm seeing a male, but maybe that's my bias, is going, my right not to wear a mask. Well, that should never overweigh the right for the whole group to be safe from whatever the current variant is, to have everyone wearing masks in the room. So I think that's a really nice way to think about it, because I do think of I don't know, I don't want to sound too socialist or whatever, but the collective seems to be, if you're going to place the rights and give the rights, the collective seems to be a more sensible place to place them than the individual, whilst in saying that also acknowledging that the individual is a part of the collective and it's a whole bunch of individuals that make up the collective. So finding where that balance is. But I like the way you've described it. It's an interesting way to think about it.
No, I'm glad you like it. I think it's quite a strong way to think about public health, because public health is about populations and about population health, not about one individual at a time, but of course, the public is made up of individuals. I wanted to go back to one thing you said, though. You pictured this room with everybody's wearing a mask and one person isn't. Just a useful point to highlight is with mask wearing is not everybody has to wear a mask for mask wearing to work, and so that's a little different from the situation you're describing, someone who's resisting wearing a mask. But there's some people who can't wear a mask; they just can't, and they have their reasons. And trauma is an important reason why a person might not be able to wear a mask. Which means that we've got to be really careful in these social encounters not to stigmatize somebody who's not wearing a mask. They may have a very good and very strong reason not to, and we have no right to know that reason. We can't demand it of them, and we certainly can't demand them to wear a mask. But that's okay, because the point about population masking is that really just most people, or almost all of the people, need to be wearing a mask to have a very big effect. And some people can be in the room not wearing a mask, they'll be protected by the other people around them. And for schools, that's really important, because children who have sensory issues might find it very hard to wear something in front of their face.
Yeah.
And that's fine, and they must not feel bad about that. All it means is that you want to strengthen the other protections around them. So you want to have good ventilation in that room, for example. You want the other people to be wearing masks. You might have other ways that you can think of to make that space extra safe, so that child can be in the room without a mask, feeling safe, being part of what's going on, and absolutely no stigma attached.
Again, I 100% agree with you, but I can also see, and I acknowledge that the argument you just put forward, which I agree with, especially when you talk about children with sensory issues, that's a really good example. The unfortunate thing, I think, is that there are many people who are just choosing to be obstinate around masks, who are then using that as an excuse to not wear masks. So that brings us back to that conversation of 5 or 6 minutes ago about, wouldn't it be lovely if we lived in that ideal community that we're unfortunately not. The people who I know who ardently refuse to wear masks are just obstinate people who are just going, don't have to wear a mask, you can't force me, this thing's ridiculous, it's not that serious, oh, it's just like the flu. That's what we hear in society, up to and including, and I know people who have this, fake kind of get out of jail free cards that say I don't have to wear a mask, and they show them not because they need them, it's because they just choose that they don't want to do it. I did want to bring up one thing from your article as well, just to get back to the idea about looking at this in schools. You wrote in your article, the current situation is unsustainable. Children with persisting symptoms from Omicron infection are already being seen. When you say persisting symptoms, you're talking long COVID, yeah?
Yes, long COVID is a bit of an umbrella term, I think, for this idea of symptoms that are occurring after that acute episode. And for some people, it's that they get better and then start having symptoms, and for others, they carry on. Okay. Yes. Sorry. Did you want? Yeah.
I'll just finish it. I'll just finish this bit off. It says teachers are reported to have higher rates of infection than the general population. Teachers in the UK are reported to be leaving the profession, citing lack of protective measures in schools and the impact of long COVID on their capacity to work. These reports should be ringing alarm bells in New Zealand. So, of course, the next step, what will happen next, and not that I'm a purveyor of doom, is that there may be teachers out there. So first of all, there was a few teachers, very small percentage, but a few, who we lost to the profession because of the mandates. Now what's going to happen is there's going to be some, small percentage, big percentage, I don't know, who if they get to this point where they feel unsafe will also leave the profession. And then because of what I would call poor leadership at the top from the 9th floor of the Beehive or government in general, if we want to be less specific, you might then be facing an issue in a year's time that, for example, it's harder to get teachers again because some have left the profession and never come back, either because of the mandates or now because of they don't feel safe in their workplace, which to me also, and I haven't said this publicly, but I've thought it, is an OSH requirement, occupation safety and health requirement, that you're supposed to be safe in your workplace if you're surrounded by potential viral loads, and as you say in your article, and teachers are being overrepresented in the data, how is that even possible under OSH requirements? That's not what we're talking about today, but that's just a thought that I've been having.
I think that's so important. When we're talking about schools, it's not only children. Again, it's the teachers. This is their workplace, and I think teachers have been put on the front line and asked to deal with something that they have no real or have very little real control over, and I'm not surprised to hear that a lot of teachers are feeling very unsafe. Just coming back to what was happening at the beginning of the Omicron outbreak, teachers know that infections run around schools. They know that already. They've already experienced that. And so I think even at the beginning, teachers were a little, certainly people that I was speaking to, were a little apprehensive about what was going on. But they were being given a lot of reassurance. They were being told that COVID didn't really transmit in schools and that there would be lots of protections in place. And fast forward to now, I think a lot of teachers are feeling quite betrayed by that, by those reassurances. And it's going to take a lot of work to bring that trust back so that people feel comfortable in their workplace again. The other fact, of course, is that teachers are so undervalued as a profession. They do such critical work. It's so important what they do. And somehow they don't get that recognition in society that they deserve. And I think this is one more instance of it. There should have been protections wrapped around teachers right from the start. They're on the front line of the outbreak with kids in schools, and they deserved much better than what they got.
Yeah. Look, I completely agree with you. I think the other thing is here in Dunedin might be different from the rest of the country. I was speaking to someone yesterday who was in Auckland and it was 18 degrees. This week in Dunedin it's been between 4 and 6 degrees. Sometimes during school hours, it's a lot harder to have an open and ventilated room for the safety of the students and the teachers if you're living in a part of the country that's already at 4 degrees and at some stage during this winter will be at 0 degrees at midday. So it's also another situation where it's not as easy to stay protected without, so we could do an external protection of being spaced and being airy, and that when you can't do that, the masks seem to be the natural thing that should come back in, assuming that COVID will be as it is in a month's time like it is today. But the government seems to not want to pull that trigger back.
Yes, it's very unfortunate. What you want in schools is layered protection, don't you? You want lots of different protections operating, because no protection is 100%. We don't expect them to be. But if something comes away, something else must come in its place, or you dial down something, you dial something up. And of course, winter is very challenging for outside air ventilation. Outside air ventilation, by the way, is very effective. It really is. So opening a window and opening a door, those things, that's very good for refreshing the air in the room. But in winter, as you point out, it simply isn't practical. And so if you're going to close the doors and close the windows, something else must happen instead. Masks is one obvious one. Another is air purifiers. By that I mean air filters, HEPA filters. So those filters will filter virus out of the air and reduce the amount of virus in the room. So if somebody comes into the room with COVID or with any other respiratory infection, in fact, that filter will be working to reduce the amount of virus for everybody else.
Yeah.
And I just haven't seen that thinking coming through. And this is why we called for an action plan, really, is to have a coordinated, coherent way of thinking about these things, thinking about how protections work together and how they might need to change in different circumstances. There needs to be some coordinating thought at the top of all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know of a teacher who's bought their own air purifier for their own room to keep themselves as safe as possible. But just to echo what I'm just saying, we're having this conversation. It's just not quite 2:30 in the afternoon. There's Dunedin's weather right now. Can I get a focus on that? It's not going to focus, is it?
I can't see that.
No, you can't see that. It's not coming up very well. Hang on, I'll put my thing down. Can we see that? See it? Well, it says 5 degrees anyway. There we go. See, it says 5 degrees.
That's properly cold.
There you go.
You know,
so that's Dunedin right now at 2:25 in the afternoon.
No. And children can't learn if they're very cold. It's
No.
not good for them. Children with asthma, for anyone with asthma will know that cold air tends to trigger that irritation of your airways. It makes you
Yep.
cough. All of that. It's not fair on children at all.
Yeah. From the Department of Public Health, the University of Otago, Dr. Amanda Kvalsvig. Hey, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you giving us some time. And I would love to have you back when there's more to talk about. But for today, thank you for your time and thank you for your expertise.
It was lovely to chat. Thank you very much.